Today I'd like to talk about making local adjustments to your RAW files starting in Bridge. So you're going to use Adobe Camera Raw to make local adjustments to your RAW files. In a previous video we covered global adjustments where we adjusted the whole image, white balance, exposure, shadows, and whatnot. Now we want to go in and create some specific adjustments to specific areas so we're not affecting the whole image at the same time. So I've just selected a few random files from within Bridge. You can see I'm using Bridge up here in the corner. And what I'm going to do is open them up in Camera Raw. So under the File menu, open in Camera Raw. It should launch Photoshop. If it doesn't, and you get this interface, bonus, you're all set. Okay. One thing to note, and if you took a look at the videos for Lightroom, these adjustments work very similarly. The tools are just located in a different area, but basically all the tools work seamlessly from one to the other, Lightroom to Bridge or Adobe Camera Raw. So first thing, when you open up multiple files, you'll notice here on the left-hand side we have this film strip, and it's just showing me the files. Now, each one you can select individually and apply your adjustments and whatnot to individual ones, or if you have multiple images, you can actually sync those settings or synchronize those settings between the multiple files if they're under the same lighting conditions and pretty much the same subject. Using this image and this image wouldn't make sense because the white balance is different, the exposure is different and whatnot. But using this image and this image, does make sense. And actually, let me go ahead and do that first so you can actually see how this works. Also, one thing to note is we have this color checker in here. It's my old color checker. But basically the idea is if you use a gray card or a color checker or some other white balancing tool, you can actually adjust one image, meaning this one, with the checker in it, and you can apply those same exact adjustments to this image, which doesn't have the color checker in it. So let's do this. First thing, we'll set the white balance. So let me zoom in here. And it's kind of pixelated, but you'll get the idea. Our tools are across the top here, and I think we mentioned that in the previous video. I recommend rolling over the tool just to see what the tool is, so you get familiar with what tools are available. The letter in parentheses is the shortcut to that tool. So in other words, the hand tool is the H, very straightforward. Z for zoom tool and so on. Okay, I for eyedropper, or the white balance tool. So I'm going to pick that, and I'm going to click on a swatch that I know to be neutral. I'm not going to click this because obviously that's going to change the color balance. But if I click on this one, which I know is supposed to be a neutral gray, and I zoom back out here, then you can see between that one and this one how it's shifted a little bit, right? So no white balance adjustment, white balance adjustment. So you can do that for any of the other adjustments over here. So if I wanted to say, let's click on auto for exposure, that's too bright, I'm going to undo that. Command Z or Control Z on the PC. But if I wanted to, increase the exposure a little bit, maybe bring down the highlights because now they're going too bright, and maybe open up the shadows a bit. If I wanted clarity to be pushed up a bit, so if I overdo it, that's kind of like making it a little crispier. And then vibrance, remember that's the color intensity. Okay, so here's the adjusted image, here's the non-adjusted image. So let's go ahead and sync those settings up, synchronize those settings. So the one I want to use as my source of adjustment, I'm going to click first, and then I'm going to go ahead and command click to pick another one. So you can see they're both highlighted, but the one with the blue is going to be the source of any adjustments that I just made and be applied to the other image or images. Under the menu up here, click on this, and it says Sync Settings. Gives me the option of going in and syncing everything, so I can check all, or I can just check none and pick individual ones. Sometimes you want to check none and then pick individual ones because let's say you made a tweak here or there, but the exposure was a little different between the two. And so, you don't need to synchronize that, every little thing. If you check all and you've only made a couple changes, no big deal. It's going to actually apply all this to it, but some of them haven't changed, so it's a wash. The main ones we're going to concentrate on are white balance, exposure, highlight, shadows, clarity, and vibrance. Okay, everything else, it doesn't matter. So when I click OK, what that's going to do is it's going to take any of these settings and apply to this image here and apply it to the other image or images if you have multiple selected. And click OK. Boom. So now this one and this one have the same adjustments. And so white balance is the same for both. That's the way you're going to use your color checker or gray card. You take a shot from with a card in it, you white balance it, apply that white balance adjustment to your subsequent images, and then go from there. Okay, so it's simple as that. For this one, that's really all I wanted to show on this image here. Kind of taking a step backwards, we talked about this in our global adjustment workflow. Something I just want to confirm. Now, in the other video, I mentioned that once you set your workflow options here, stupid email. Once you set your workflow options, they should be set for every working session you have. I'm just going to point this out again so that we can actually see that they're the same. So previously I set it to ProPhoto RGB. So if you're shooting Camera Raw or using Camera Raw files, ProPhoto RGB at 16 bits per channel. I'm not going to resize it. I can do that afterwards. I want to keep all the information intact. I'm not going to sharpen it, or I'm not going to use it as a smart object just yet. So I've confirmed it, clicking OK, boom, done. Okay, so I'm not going to cover everything we did previously. Look at the global adjustments for any fixes. For here, I'm going to click on maybe one of these other images to talk about local adjustments. So let's use this image. I know we used a different body earlier, or in the other video for Lightroom. Let's do the same with this one, or do something similar. And so some local adjustments that you can make are removing blemishes, removing artifacts. If there's stray hairs, you can fix that with this brush here. It's called the spot removal brush. Now, I'm not going to cover every single tool in here today, but what we'll talk about is spot removal. We have a red eye reduction if you need it. We have an adjustment brush, which we'll also cover, and then these two, graduated filter and radial filter. As we move along, and we'll address the crop tool as well. As we move along, we'll address some of these other tools. So, don't worry if you're not getting everything all in one shot. So first thing is, we're going to assume we made our exposure adjustments. I just clicked on auto, so that way it made, any changes that we deemed necessary. Skin tone was a little kind of dull, so it kind of lightened things up. And you can go from here. You can make, and this is a global adjustment right now, but just to kind of get us at a starting point, you can go in and make whatever changes you need to make globally, and then go in and do your spot removal stuff. But let's do this. Let's say, and I've had this question in class, what if you were done working on this session, but you weren't ready to save the file to hand in or send it to a client or ready to output it? Well, simply all you have to do is click done. No other, naming, no other thing you have to do. Just click done, and that will take us out of Camera Raw. Easy. So those are changes you can see here on our little thumbnails. These are now the same, white balance. Before, they were kind of yellowish because of the light. So now they're color corrected and white balanced, and they're all set. So I'm going to go just back into this again, just to show you that clicking done will take you out of Camera Raw, out of Adobe Camera Raw processor, and get you back to Bridge. So again, under File, open in Camera Raw, and just by clicking done, you've basically saved any adjustments you made to those images. I want to go over here. Well, I'll come back to this. What we're going to do here is now do our local adjustments. And so I'm going to click on the spot removal tool. Let's pick this image here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in. And so what I want to do is remove some of the blemishes. You know, again, everybody has little beauty marks and whatnot, and there's nothing wrong with leaving them. But sometimes, you know, you want to remove anything that might be distracting. If it's an actual pimple, not a beauty mark, you might want to remove that. Your client will definitely appreciate that. The way this tool works is off of a brush concept or brush metaphor. And so basically you're going to paint on whatever adjustment you want to make or whatever cover up you want to apply. Looking at our options across on the side here, we have type is a heal and clone. We'll mention that in a second. The size is the size of the brush. So if I go with a bigger number, obviously a bigger brush. If I go with a really small number, tiny brush. Feather is just how soft the brush is. And you can see from the outside, you know, that dotted line shows the brush size, and then the center circle shows us how big the feather is. So if I bring this down, the feather is very close to the edge of the brush. If I bring it way up here, the transition from the dark inner circle to the dotted line is going to be really soft and feathery and, you know, fuzzy. Opacity is just how opaque or transparent that effect or cover up is applied. So if it's, you know, 100% opaque, you will totally not see behind it. If I make this 50%, the cover up will be semi-transparent, basically. Okay. A couple other options you have on this side. Let me zoom back out real quick. All right, so you have this handy tool down here. It's called Visualize Spots. I turn that on, and it gives you this kind of funky looking, you know, screen. Well, if I turn it off, you can see like this right here, these little moles, beauty marks, will show up. Now you could cover them up in this mode, you know, but it's showing you any little anomalies in the image and giving you basically a heads up as to what you might want to look for. You can change how sensitive this little tool is. Going up here might be a little overkill, but basically if I go down to this level here, I can kind of get an idea of what areas I need to clean up. Okay, so we got a couple little things here, a couple little things here, and whatnot. Now I'll show you both ways. You can actually make your corrections in this mode or in this mode. So we'll come back. So right now we know, obviously, you know, we want to cover up a few things. I don't want a brush that's huge. I want a brush that's just big enough to cover. You know, and I'm going to use, you know, we could try 100% feather. You know, it doesn't have to be 100%, but you do want to have some type of feather on it. That way it really covers it up and blends it back into, you know, its surrounding. So I'm going to click on that, and all I have to do is one click. Notice the two circles here. I have a red circle and a green circle. The red circle is what's being covered up. The green circle is what is being used to cover it up. If I went in, I can actually move these things around. So if I didn't quite get it in the right spot, I can move that over. I move it back because it was actually in the right spot. But if I took this green one, I can say, you know what? Photoshop didn't do, or Camera Raw didn't do a very good guess. And so I'm going to pick a different area, maybe over here. If I go over here, and sometimes it'll kind of go haywire. It's kind of hard to see. But here you can see it's, you know, looks like a hickey. I don't know. It looks crazy. So that's obviously the wrong spot. So we want to have something that looks like it would fit in this area or cover up that area. That one's done. All I have to do is now is just click on these other areas. And it's just a single click. You don't have to paint anything. You don't have to do anything special. Just click and it will give you the best guess. Like I said, if it's not the right pick, then you just go and move those. Or if you don't like it at all, just delete it. So I just go in and quickly fine tune these areas. Get this one over here. You know, if it's something that's really distinctive, you know, if you get lucky enough to work, you know, with Cindy Crawford, she's got that trademark mole. Well, I think she'd be pretty upset if you actually took that mole away just because your teacher said you could, at one point, take moles away or blemishes. So sometimes you have to use your own discretion as to whether or not it makes sense to do that. Okay, so here what I've done is I've removed the main spots, the ones that seem to be the most obvious. In our palette over here on the right hand side, below visualize spots, we have show overlay. These little circles that show us where we've actually made corrections are the overlays. I can turn that off so we don't see any of those overlays at the moment. Okay, they're still there, you just turn it back on and you can come back in and re-edit these at any point. If you just want to start again, start over, you can click on clear all. So it removes all the adjustments here. So if you spend a lot of time with this, don't click that. So one thing I do want to show though, we turn visualize spots back on, and you can see some of these things are actually cleaned up. You know, this kind of stuff isn't relevant. I don't think it'll even show up if you printed it. Okay, so one thing I do want to show is the difference between heal and clone. And so let me go ahead and do this. I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger. Now, these spots here, all we did was just clicked on them because they're just little points that we need to cover up. Sometimes you need to cover up more of an area. So if I wanted to take this and paint on it, notice it's leaving a brush trail behind it. Remember, this still has the green and red. Red's being covered up. Green's not being used as a source. So if I move this over, notice how it picks up this part of the skin and attempts to cover up the bracelet here. Now, we talked about the feather. The feather is how soft that transition is. Let me take the feather down, and now it's a harder transition. Opacity, kind of the same idea. It makes it more translucent. You can kind of see through it still. So I'm going to cover that up completely and make it 100%. Let's see. Feather, we said we're going to move that back up a little bit. So it has a little bit of a blend to it. Now here's the difference between heal and clone. Heal will attempt to take one area and blend the color and the texture into the other area. So we're blending from green to red. It's taking the texture and the color and trying to blend this together to keep it realistic. What clone does is it doesn't care. It doesn't try to blend it together. It gives you an exact copy from one area to another. Okay, so that's because of the feathers being so soft. But here you can see, now you can see how the feather is working. Okay, so it's kind of abrupt right here. And so, but what it's doing, if I take that all the way down, it's giving me an exact duplicate of this area. Let me delete those. If you need to get rid of them, just hit the delete key on your keyboard and they go away. Let's do the same idea, but the other direction. So I'm going to take this area. I'm just going to do something like that. Okay, so again, let's try with heal first. I'm going to take my green, which is the source, and notice heal, because it's going from darker to lighter, it's actually giving me something more of a, almost like an exact copy, even in heal mode. Clone will give you an exact copy. And so if you really needed another bracelet, you know, down here, you can do that. So The main thing is when you're covering blemishes up like this, typically you're going to stay in heal mode as opposed to cloning. If you need an exact copy, go back to cloning. Go back to clone mode, and it'll give you an exact copy of what you're trying to use as the source. So that's the main difference. So deleting that. So here we have the spot removal brush, and we basically have covered up any blemishes that we deemed that we didn't want to be part of our final image. So you can always go back, get the spot removal brush, add some more spots or more cover-ups to it, spot removals to it. If I change to any other tool, those little circles go away, but the cover-up is still intact. Again, using Camera Raw is non-destructive, which means I can go back at any point in the life of this file and make these corrections. Simple. Okay, so we did the white balance. We have our spot removal brush. Let's do an adjustment brush. Okay, an adjustment brush, again, it's a brush metaphor, meaning you're going to paint on some type of effect. Notice my options here on the side have changed. There's a lot more options here. Basically, the adjustment brush allows us to make color temperature adjustments, exposure, and so on, clarity, noise reduction. So if there's an area that's very noisy based on it being underexposed and you had to pull that information out, or high ISO, you can paint in noise reduction. So again, we're going to just do some of the basics, and we'll talk more about some of the specific noise reduction, moire, and whatnot down the line. So simply for this image, originally when I shot this, the background was darker, it appeared darker, but when we open this up, when we lighten it globally, the background went a little too bright and too red, which is weird because it's actually a blue background. I don't know. So anyway, what I want to do now is I'm just going to go ahead and paint an adjustment. So again, we talked about the brush and the brush size. Down at the bottom here, we have our brush size. That's way too big because I want to get in this area right here, and that might be too much and it'll cover up her arm. So I want to reduce the size of the brush. So I can move the slider, move it back over and say, okay, is that right? Or here's a little handy shortcut. And Camera Raw, Photoshop, everything has shortcuts. So the letter P on your keyboard, those brackets to the right, the curly bracket and the square bracket, the one on the left, the closest one to the letter P on the keyboard, makes the brush smaller. The other one to the right of that makes the brush bigger. So when you're over here, I can make the brush smaller and bigger as needed. So I can make it big for this, and then I can make it small when I go down here. And if you hear that tapping sound, that's just me hitting the keyboard, making the brush bigger or smaller. So these handy shortcuts really make you more efficient. That's why it's not a bad idea to learn, the letter C for crop, the letter B for spot removal, K for adjustment brush. Some of the shortcuts won't make sense in the, what the brush is. I for eyedropper makes sense. H for hand makes sense. But K for adjustment, not so much. So anyway, you just have to kind of memorize those things. Okay, with the step backwards. With the adjustment brush here, I'm going to make an adjustment to this area. Now, all I'm going to do right now is paint in this area. So you may see it actually lightening up. I'm not worried about that right now. All I want to do is kind of get a rough idea of where I'm going to make an adjustment. Okay, so I let go of the mouse, and you notice a little pin up here. That pin just says there's some kind of adjustment applied. Now, it defaulted to 0.5 exposure, which means a half a stop more exposure. If I go this direction, it's going to keep lightening it up. Or if I want to darken it, I can drag it back down. So it's actually looking a lot better, and it's about a stop, one whole stop under from where it started. Okay, now let me jump down to the bottom here to point out a couple other things. The overlay is that little pin. Adjustment's still there, it's just not showing that pin. You can have multiple adjustments, as we'll see here in a second. The mask, it's covering up one area with this new exposure adjustment, and it's leaving the other part alone. When I show the mask, it's going to show up as white. In this case, I can change that color by clicking that, and let's click on something that makes sense, maybe blue. Red wouldn't make sense because the background appears red, so you want something that has a little bit of contrast to it. Now, showing the mask, you can see I've kind of gotten sprayed over her arm here and her hand and a little bit here along her neck. So the mask is covering that. What I'm going to do is continue painting this down here, and I'll fix all that stuff up in a second. So making the brush smaller and painting that. Okay, so now what's going to happen, I turn the mask off, is it's going to be subtle to see, but this is getting darker along the edge of her arm because the mask is over her arm. And so at this point, I can, continue working on this, or I can actually clean this mask up a bit. And so I'm going to keep the mask on so I can actually see it. But notice up here, we have New, Add, and Erase. After you click the new one, it automatically jumps to Add. If I wanted at this point to make a new one, I can go somewhere else. This pin has been deactivated. If I want to edit it, I just click on it again, and now it's the active pin. See, it says Add. If I make a new one, it makes a brand new adjustment here, and I can edit that as I see fit. And I'll do that in a second. But let me go ahead and back to this one. I'm going to modify this one. So again, if I wanted to increase or decrease the exposure, I can do it here. And so because I oversprayed on this, I'm going to actually go ahead and erase part of the mask or erase some of the selected adjustment. And so with the erase, again, it works off a brush, and this brush is going to be different than the last brush. So when you have it set to Add, notice my brush size and feather. When I say Erase, my options change because the brush for erase might not be the same as the brush for adding. So again, I want to have not a big size, but I do want to have a little bit of feather so it kind of blends in. I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to throw a couple other shortcuts at you. Hopefully you'll write these down, hint, hint. And the shortcut to zoom in is Command Spacebar. So I've got the zoom tool. Notice I'm still on this adjustment brush tool at the top here. Command Spacebar allows me to zoom in. It's Control Spacebar on the PC. On the Mac, it's Option Spacebar to zoom out, or Alt Spacebar on a PC to zoom out. When I'm zoomed in and I need to move around my image, so I'm done working on this area and I want to go down here, just the spacebar gives you the hand tool. Because there's no scroll bars in Adobe Camera Raw, you need to either zoom back out and zoom back in, or use the hand tool here. Again, notice I don't change tools, I can just pan around. So very handy. Command Spacebar or Control Spacebar on the PC zooms in, Option or Alt Spacebar zooms out, and just the spacebar alone allows me to pan around my image using the hand tool. Another way to get more efficient is just by using these keyboard shortcuts, so that way you're not changing tools all the time, going over here left and right. Okay, just these little time savers will add up, trust me. Okay, so we're in erase mode. We've got our erase brush set. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through here, and I'm going to make it a little softer because I want it to blend. So I'm going to go along here, and you can kind of see, that blue effect is being removed. Now I'm going to keep a little bit on there because otherwise it looks like too abrupt of an edge. And if I took off too much, then I can go back in and fix it. Space bar, get the hand tool, just we'll move along here. Looks like I gave her a bruise on her arm by accident. Okay. Nailed it. All right, cool. Well, that's pretty close. Left bracket makes the brush smaller. I can get in tighter if I need to. I can zoom in and really dial in what I'm, working on. Okay, so oh, look at that. Notice that. You guys didn't tell me. I missed the ear. All right. Command Z is your friend. Try something. Command Z on the Mac, Control Z on the PC will undo that last step. So don't hesitate to use that. Now if I turn off my mask, the bottom there, now it looks much cleaner along the edge. Boom. So we've made our adjustments globally. We went in and we made our local adjustment brush adjustments, which is what we're doing here. We went in and did our spot removals. And so if there's any other little fine tuning areas that you need to affect, if we want to go in and lighten her arm down here, we can do that with creating another adjustment brush option. So click on New, and over here, and it may default to the previous setting. You can pre-adjust it if you want. So making a new brush, I know I want to lighten it. So let's move that up to, let's make it 1. I'm always a big fan of over correcting and then dialing it back as opposed to just not being able to see what I'm working on. So here, make the brush bigger, nice and soft, and I'm just going to go ahead and paint. And you can keep painting as long as you feel it's necessary. And maybe this correction is just a little over. Maybe lower that, maybe bring that down a little bit. Yeah, looking a little bit better. So here, maybe bring that down to maybe 1. So let me take this off completely. So I set it back to 0. So basically it looks like there's no adjustment whatsoever. There's her mask. So if I go up here and I move the slider up a bit, you can see it lightening. So if I overdo it, it's going to be too bright. And if I bring it down to here, it might be just right. So from that point, I can go in and click Done or output the file as needed. So let's go ahead and do that. So here what we're going to do is let's save the image out. Okay, so let's just say that we are done working on this. We don't need to do anything else to it, and we're ready to save it. So since I only have one image selected, in the lower left-hand corner here, it'll say Save Image. So I'm going to click that. So here are my save options. And so you can specify which folder you want to save it into. And we talked about how we want to organize our folders. And so I'm going to change that. And I'm going to go up one level. And I'm going to make this a new folder called Output. And select that folder. Okay, so now it's going to go into my output folder. Remember, we want to keep our raw files separate from our working files, separate from our output files. It just keeps the whole group of files easier to find, easier to locate that one specific file that you might be looking for. So once we have our destination folder specified or location specified, we set the file extension or the format. It doesn't matter. We have JPEG and we have other options here. JPEG or Photoshop are really what we're going to be dealing with at the moment. TIFF file would be if you wanted to, have it printed at a higher end printer. If you're taking it to Costco, they prefer JPEGs. DNG files, which are digital negative files, we'll talk more about those, but they're more like a raw file. I call them my agnostic raw files, which means they're not Canon, they're not Sony, they're not Nikon, they're just RAW files. The idea being that those digital negative files will be usable in Camera Raw, in Lightroom in the future. So you don't have to worry about your camera being supported if you actually have a DNG file. So it's not a bad idea to have that. And if you make changes to it, they get saved in the DNG file, just like when you're editing a Camera Raw image. For now, we're going to say JPEG. Always have the question, why this JPEG or this JPEG? They're all the same. Basically, it's just whether or not you like lowercase or uppercase naming. I'm a lowercase naming guy myself, so I'm going to say that. So it automatically changes this to JPEG. If I change this to TIFF, the format changes as well. So JPEG format, awesome. Metadata. For our purposes for class, please keep all the metadata attached to the file. The metadata includes copyright information, but also Camera Raw information, shutter speeds, apertures, ISOs, and whatnot. So I definitely want that so I can actually give you feedback on how you shot the image. I'm going to say 10 to 12. If file size is an issue, storage-wise, then you can change it to a lower number. Keep in mind, JPEG files are compressed files. They get smaller the more you compress them. So the lower the number, the smaller the file, but the lower the quality. So maximum quality, you'll still be smaller than your RAW file, but you'll have better quality setting it to 10 to 12. You can actually type in a number too. So if you wanted 12, go for it. Color space, Adobe RGB is perfect when you're outputting to a JPEG. 8 bits per channel, again, is perfect. You could save it as a JPEG to sRGB. That actually might be a safer way to go. sRGB is a limited color space. It's more designed for images that are going to be displayed on the internet. And so all our JPEGs are going to be RGB files, but also 8 bits. So it doesn't make sense, and you don't even have the option here to save them any more than 8 bits per channel. Some of the assignments, the criteria is resizing the image to fit the long side. So we have 1,000 pixels for the long side, and some of the directions may say resolution of 100. We'll talk more about resolution, but it's kind of irrelevant for this. But you can set it to 1,000 pixels. I may change that based on seeing the images, in your assignments. But for now, specify the destination, specify the format, keep all the metadata attached to that file, and if you choose to do this for an assignment or save it for an assignment, resize to fit the long side. So that means if it's a horizontal image, it'll be 1,000 pixels wide by whatever height. And if it's a vertical image, as this one is, it'll make it 1,000 pixels tall by, in this case, 667 pixels wide, because it's more of a tall or landscape, tall portrait image. The horizontal images are called landscape, horizontal. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to click Save. You'll see it says 1 remaining. Depending on the speed of your computer, how big the file is and whatnot, it'll actually go quick, like that one, or it'll actually take a little bit longer. You can actually save multiple files. So if I click on all of these, I can say Save Images. They all get the same format, but they obviously have different names. So the one we just saved is this one, and it would have this file name with a .jpg at the end. So once I've clicked on that save and this has gone away, I can keep working on this image. Now, keep in mind, if you work on the image, the changes you just made since you worked on it after you saved it won't be applied to this saved JPEG. Okay, so if you want these new exposure, adjustment brush, spot removal, any of that stuff, if you want them applied for something to hand in or have it printed, you need to save out a new image. Cool. So where should we go with this? Oh, a couple other things. Yes, let's talk about those. So let's talk about the crop tool. So I'm going to pick this. I did this in class last semester. Let's go ahead and use the spot white balance tool here, eyedropper. And if I know that an area is supposed to be neutral, I can click on it. Now it's a leap of faith, and notice that I actually did a pretty good job. I know this card is a white card, so I could use that as well. Again, give it a shot, see what it's going to do. If it doesn't look right, then undo it and do something else. So what I want to do is show the crop tool. And for the crop tool, I'm just going to click and drag. Now I shot this specifically knowing that I'm going to get rid of that white card. So, got some sound effects going on in here. All right, so as soon as I change tools, I see now my crop. I've had some questions from students saying, okay, well, my image is a little crooked, or the horizon isn't quite level. Well, we have a handy tool for that. It's called the straighten tool. So I click on the straighten tool, and the idea here is you're going to click on the line that you think should be the horizon, or you can actually do a vertical line as well. So I'm going to do the horizon line. I'm just going to guess here and say, okay, that's supposed to be straight, and I'm going to just use that as my reference. Click on that or let go, and what it'll do, actually, let me step backwards. I'm going to get rid of this clear crop, and now let's do the straighten tool again. Okay, so the idea here is that what it'll do is it'll actually create a crop box that's rotated to be the correct angle. Now, it's going to be hard to see. You really can't tell, but this is actually rotated to the right just a little bit. Okay, so again, let me bring these in. Yeah, bring that in farther. Compositionally, I can probably just leave it like that, but I'm going to make it centered for this example. Cool. Again, changing a different tool now has that cropped. And it's kind of funny. To me, this looks a little crooked now, even though this tray in the background was horizontal. This image of this bottle looks a little tilted to the left. So let's double check that. I'm going to click and drag this up the edge because I know that bottle's straight. I don't know if you noticed it moved a little bit. And switching tools, cool. So before and after, notice a little bit of a shift. So the background was a little crooked, what I use as a reference. Now the horizon is going to be horizontal for you. So this is a man-made thing. The horizon you can safely use as a horizontal reference. Or if it's a building, you can go and you've got the straight vertical on it, you can actually use that as a reference too. The edge of the building is most likely straight. Okay, so here we are. We have our image. I'm going to click on auto just to see what happens. It lightened it up a bit. And really the whole idea with this one was to show the crop tool. Let's bring up some of these other tools here. Graduated filter. Let's say you wanted to have something blend from one value to another. Just like we did with the adjustment brush here, we can use the graduated filter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag and go down. Notice it changes a little bit. So the idea with this is it's going to take from the green to the red 100% of whatever effect I give it to 0% of the effect. So what that means is here in this case, if I change the exposure up or down, it's going to blend 100% of the effect all the way down to here. Now I can start this lower, 100% of the effect, and that's when it starts to blend from this point to that point. So if you need to, let's say you were doing a sunset and you want the sky just to be a little bit more intense exposure-wise and or, let's say, vibrance. Well, in this case, we're going to have to use saturation, not so much the vibrance, but it doesn't matter. So saturation-wise, I can intensify that. This might not be a good example for that because it's kind of monochromatic. So anyway, the idea here though is we can go ahead and adjust that. We can make a new one. Similar to the way we had the adjustment brush, I can make a new gradient. And let's say from the bottom up, I wanted to darken it. Oh, I mean, not in this case, lighten it, I guess. Now, I'm using these vertically, but you can angle them as well. So if you want the effect to come in from the side, you can rotate these and angle them however way you want, or you can just have it blend up like this. Okay, so we take the shadows down a little bit maybe, bring that bottom up. Cool. Again, this has the overlay and the mask idea. I have multiple pins here. Here's this one, and this is the first one I created. Click on that, and it makes that one active. So if I make changes, I can make changes here. So I can open up the shadows a bit if I wanted to. See where that goes. I brought the exposure down, maybe bringing the highlights down. So the light areas go a little bit darker. And if I uncheck overlay, now I can see this. So I think we did this before, but I'm going to use the before and after. So I'm clicking down here, and it's before and after left-right split, and that's kind of like what I like to see. This is the before and then the after. White balance adjustment, definitely needed it. This is more neutral on the right-hand side. And also with, our graduated filters, we've darkened this part and lightened this part compared to the original. Cool. Let's do one more. And I'm going to click on that. And let's pick this image. This one, again, I'm going to just crop it. I'm not so worried about it being straight, but you know what? Let's just use that as the horizon. Straighten tool, click and drag that. So that way it'll rotate it up a little bit. I mean, it looks like it rotates the other way, but when I click off, it'll rotate back up. So now that horizon is more horizontal, so to speak. Actually, the exposure and everything's pretty close. Yeah, let's go with auto. It's pretty close. 0.6, 2/3 of a stop. Not bad, not bad. And so some of this stuff I'm not going to mess around with. I can go in here. I notice a little speck here. And as you do more and more of this, you'll notice little things that stand out. Clicking that, space bar to get the hand tool. That one's going to be a little trickier, but yeah, so you can see, turn off overlays. Notice how it little shifted. So, the way around that is to either make that a little bit smaller. And you may have to take this in stages. And when you do the healing brush, that's where it kind of falls apart. It smears things along edges like this. So here, in this case, this is a perfect example when I would want to use a clone. And I'm going to have to notice how it's cloning that exactly. So I need to move that up. And boom. Pretty close. Now, a little less close. All right, so showing my overlay again. Move that, back that off a little bit. And you can take this in a couple different pieces. You don't have to do it all in one shot. So move it out of the way so I can actually see what I'm working on. So anyway, oops, sorry Siri, hit the wrong key. And I hit that, I did not need it. Okay, so as I zoomed in, I saw a couple different things. I'm gonna go back to healing and I'm gonna clear that up. And then I'm going to take this little spot, make the brush a little bit smaller, and get rid of that. So you're going to want to, if this is going to be printed, this whole area of the image, you definitely want to zoom in, walk around your image. When I say walk, I mean use the hand tool and look around your image, zoomed in, so you can actually see any little artifacts or anomalies that you may want to cover up. Okay. So you definitely want to make sure that you clean up your image. Cool. Showing overlay. That looks good. Good enough for now. So the last tool I wanted, or last local adjustment I wanted to show you is the radial filter. Now the cool thing about this is it works similarly to the graduated filter, this one we just did, but this one's radial, meaning circular, starts out from the center point and works its way out. Ooh, super fancy. And so here, again, I'm going in and changing the exposure. I can change any of these other options here, or I can set them back to where they were, like 0 and 0. I can, as I scroll down the bottom here, change the feather so I can increase the feather, or I can decrease it so it makes it less soft. And then this effect, let's say it's -3 stops, darker here along the edge. Sometimes you want to work just the opposite. You want the edge to be lighter, but you have to draw a circle. I can set this to inside, so the effect happens inside the circle as opposed to outside the circle. So you can swap that. Say if I needed to lighten this, I can go the other direction for whatever reason I want to do that. Okay, so here we have the effect outside. That might be a little too aggressive, but something subtle. Draw the viewer's eye in towards the center as opposed to having it just kind of wander around outside here. Notice you'll have these little squares on the edges. That means I can stretch this out. If I don't see the top ones, I just zoom out and I can do this. And this little curved shape, and this is a common Camera Raw Photoshop thing. It means I can rotate it. Let me make it a little bit more oval so you can actually see what that looks like. So here, I can rotate this oval to kind of match some shape if I need to, or whatever. Okay, so it doesn't have to be just, egg-shaped. It can be circular too, and you can move it around. Notice the little plus sign in the middle there. It means I can move this around. So it really is handy, really a nice tool to kind of draw you in. Now, the tricky part about any editing digitally is you want to make it look believable. You don't want to look too over the top. So here, that definitely looks too much. I took the overlay off so I can see the image without that oval shape. This looks too much. It looks kind of fake. My goal when I'm editing is I don't want it to look too manipulated. And so, you can go ahead and play around with the different settings, maybe a bigger feather, kind of help that transition a little bit. Yeah, better. Now I can probably even lower that. So you want it to be subtle. You don't want it to be way in your face, because people are pretty savvy and they can see things that, if it's been manipulated too much. Okay, so just as a recap, we used our color checker with our white balance. We used the crop tool and the straighten tool, which helps us line things up horizontally or vertically. We used our spot removal brush to remove any blemishes, artifacts, stray hairs, whatever. And we used our adjustment brush to selectively or locally make changes to the image so it's not over the entire image. It's specific to certain areas. Our graduated filter allows us to blend from one value to another, whatever adjustment we set on the side here. And the radial filter as well does the same thing, but not linear, and more circular or oval shaped. So those are our local adjustments in Adobe Camera Raw. I'm going to click done. I'm done with my editing session, and we are over and out.